Hey guys, it's your old mate Greg here from Playtech. Today we're going to be looking at the Steelseries Aerox 5, Aerox 5 Wireless, and the Aerox 9 Wireless. These three mice are a continuation of Steelseries' lightweight Aerox range, which you might be familiar with if you saw a couple of our videos from last year which featured the Aerox 3. There are a range of common features between the mice, which I'll run through together, and then we'll take a closer look at each of the mice individually. All of these mice have the signature squarish weight relief holes throughout the bulk of the chassis, which Steelseries say are responsible for reducing the overall weight by about 20 grams. You might think that having exposed internals would make these mice susceptible to dust or moisture, but if you look closely, you can actually see they have an IP54 aqua barrier coating over the components, which means they're protected from dust and splashes of water. Obviously, dust can still pass through the holes in the outer shell, but this really just means that the dust will not prevent the mouse from functioning. Regardless, I'd still consider giving it a quick blast with a can of compressed air every 5 or 6 months, just to keep it tidy. Now if we flip them over, we can see on the base of the mice, there's a semi-transparent inner chassis. This allows the light to shine through and also helps diffuse the RGB lighting at the rear. The pure PTFE skates also show that Steelseries have taken on board some of the lessons they learnt in the earlier Aerox 3 release, which led them to re-release the Aerox 3 with bigger skates in the Aerox 3 2022 edition. A really interesting new addition is the skate around the sensor, which in addition to supporting the middle of the mouse for palm grip users, should in theory also help keep debris on your mouse pad away from the sensor. Speaking of which, the sensor in all of these mice is the TrueMove Air, which is an excellent optical sensor with a proven track record, as we've already seen this sensor in the Rival 3 Wireless, the Rival 5, the Aerox 3 Wireless, and the Prime Wireless. The TrueMove Air can track up to 400 inches per second, which is literally double what humans are realistically capable of achieving, and with the capability to capture up to 18,000 counts per inch at 1000 Hz, I can't imagine anyone asking for anything more from a modern gaming sensor. Heading back over to the top side again, the click switches have gold-plated contacts and are rated for 80 million key presses. They're also IP54 rated, much like the rest of the internals, which is reassuring. The feel of the click is quite crisp, and it has a roughly medium weight to the click, which is just enough to prevent misclicks, but not enough to feel heavy at all. All of these mice have a sturdy rubberized wheel with a solid click, but the Aerox 9 has a few little extras in this department, but we'll come back to that later. Just below the wheel we have an additional little button here, which is programmable, but it's usually assigned to switching between CPI levels. Now that we've covered the similarities, let's start looking at how these mice differ from each other. Let's start with the Aerox 5. At 66 grams, this is the lightest of the bunch, and is only 7 grams heavier than the Aerox 3. Those extra 7 grams get you a lot of mouse though. With a slightly higher bump in the middle and a higher leading edge, the Aerox 5's larger frame has a fuller feel in your hand. This larger chassis allows for quite an interesting new suite of buttons on the side here. At face value, it looks like we've got just 4 buttons on the side here, the silver one in the front, and then this cluster of 3 gloss black buttons on the top edge. You may notice, however, that this longer top button protrudes a little bit. That's because it's not a typical button. It actually has 2 separate switches inside it, one that actuates when the button is pressed upwards, and another that fires when the switch is pressed downwards. This makes a total of 5 buttons on the side, plus 4 on the top, meaning altogether we have 9 buttons on the Aerox 5. The layout of these side buttons is quite interesting, and if you're not used to multi-genre mice, it could be a little bit confusing and uncomfortable trying to use it, so I'll give you a little tip. Don't try to press all of these buttons with the tip of your thumb like you would usually. Doing this is a very uncomfortable motion that will slow you down considerably. Instead, place your thumb on the pad below the buttons and roll in the direction of the buttons. This will allow you to hit the buttons a lot faster and more accurately. You can see by the shape and layout of the buttons that this is the way the mouse was designed. Doing this allows you to hit 4 of the 5 switches without even really moving your thumb from its resting position. You still need to sweep your thumb up and down to hit the downward switch at the top, so I recommend setting that to your least used function. Connecting the mouse to your PC is a detachable mesh cable which has very little drag, and being detachable means that you can replace it or change it to another cable if you ever need to. Now if cables aren't really your thing, then we have the Aerox 5 Wireless, which has all the fantastic features we just talked about, but lets you ditch the cable and connect to your PC over Bluetooth or 2.4 GHz wireless with the included dongle. The internal battery offers up to 180 hours of playtime and only adds an additional 8 grams to the overall weight, for a total of 74 grams. We can change between wireless modes with this small switch on the base, and included in the box is a little USB-C adapter that lets you connect the charge cable to the dongle so that you can position it somewhere to get maximum reception. This is great if your PC sits under a desk or is tucked away somewhere. While we're talking about reception though, Steelseries Quantum 2.0 Wireless actually broadcasts on 2 channels simultaneously and switches between them automatically if there's any interference, which allows for completely uninterrupted low latency gaming. Now lastly, we have the Aerox 9 Wireless, which uses the same wireless technology as the Aerox 5 Wireless, but it has a completely different button layout. First, we'll start with the obvious. On the side here, we have a grid of 12 buttons that are laid out almost like the number pad on your keyboard. Obviously, all these extra buttons add a little bit of weight to the mouse, which comes in at a total of 89 grams. We'll talk a bit more about weight though at the end of the video, so if you're thinking that sounds a little bit heavy, just hold that thought. Once again, if we look at the way the buttons are shaped, we can see a hint in how we should hold this mouse. The little raised ridge on the 5 button should allow you to feel the home position for your thumb. Once again, for the most part, you're going to be rolling your thumb to activate the buttons. But of course the rear keys may still require some repositioning. For most MMOs and RPGs, I'd suggest putting your main DPS skill rotations on the top 2 rows with your longer cooldowns and buffs towards the rear. I've used mice with similar button layouts for years and through many different MMOs and action RPGs, and I find that although there is a small learning curve, the gains can be great. For instance, if you place your left hand over the W, A, S, and D keys for movement, but then you need to use the number keys for skills, in order to use one of those skills, you have to remove your finger from movement and sacrifice your mobility for that time until you can return your finger from the skill key to the W, A, S, and D. Now there's also a couple of sneaky extra buttons on the Aerox 9 that I've noticed that some people are missing. The mouse wheel has its standard click, but it also clicks left and right. The separation of the switches is really well done as well, so you shouldn't have to worry about a misfire. My favorite use for these is when playing as a caster in an MMO, you can switch your targets backwards and forwards. Having both directions allows you to skip back if you miss something, while as usually with a keyboard, if you're tab targeting, you'd have to keep cycling through all the available targets to get back to where you wanted to aim. Now of course, all these extra keys aren't only useful for gaming, they're also really good for productivity and can be used as shortcuts in all sorts of design and editing apps to save you from having to learn all the different key commands. So if you're looking for a new lightweight gaming mouse, which one should you choose? My personal recommendation would be the Aerox 5. It's a safe bet for almost any genre of games. Even FPS gamers who usually stick to a 2-button mouse can definitely gain an advantage with the additional control, especially if you use the buttons in the way that I detailed earlier. However, if you're hardcore into MMOs or even milsim type stuff like Armor that has a crazy amount of controls to remember, then the Aerox 9 is going to be an amazing mouse for you. All 3 mice can be customized via the engine section of the Steelseries GG software, so you can customize the button mappings, RGB lighting, sensitivity of the TrueMove Air sensor to ensure that the mouse is totally personalized to exactly how you'd like it. Now before we wrap up, I just wanted to have a quick word about weight. Steelseries lists these mice as ultralight, but I know a lot of you are going to say some of these are actually too heavy to be considered an ultralight mouse. And to be fair, these aren't the lightest mice on the market by any stretch of the imagination. But for the amount of extra buttons and control that you're getting, they're way ahead of anything else. Let's compare the Aerox 9 to some of my old favorite MMO mice that I've personally owned over the years. The Logitech G600 is 133 grams out of the box, and the Razer Naga Trinity is approximately 120 grams, and they're both wired mice. And now if we look at the Aerox 5, pretty much everything else in the same weight range is just a standard 2-button mouse. At the most, some of its competitors might have 2 side buttons, but there's nothing like the Aerox 5 that comes close in weight. So in my mind, I guess I think of these 3 mice like MMO and multi-genre mice first and foremost. They also happen to be ridiculously light for what they are. Anyway, I hope that cleared things up, and if you're looking at these mice, hopefully I've helped you narrow down your selection. That's all from me today, guys, and I will see you next time.